Well, good morning from Ithaca, New York, home of Cornell University. My name is Nicholas Phillips, and I serve as a host and producer here for eCornell. It's my pleasure to welcome you to an excellent hour of programming. Today is all about AI and how it's affecting workers, consumers, and businesses. AI has had an impact on the convergence of consumer-grade experiences and cost and data accuracy. These factors have led IBM's investment in AI within HR. For IBM, AI is driving increased productivity and cost savings. Today, we'll help answer some questions like how IBM HR has faced and overcame some of the challenges of adopting data and AI practices, and how IBM HR ensures responsible and ethical use of AI. On the flip side, we'll also hear about the research being done by the folks over here at the ILR school surrounding the AI revolution. Some of the research being done includes warehouse automation, geospatial data analysis, and workforce implications. We'll also discuss what the future might hold when it comes to work and how the ILR school has increased curricular emphasis on data science. Now, before I introduce you to our speakers, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. We've reserved time during our conversation to answer your questions. You could submit them by opening the chat dialog box in the top right corner of the player. We'll also share some helpful resources there as well, so keep a lookout for those. And with that, let me introduce Alex Colvin, the Dean of Cornell's ILR School. He also serves as a professor in the Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution. And joining us for the first time, but hopefully not the last, Nickle, LaMoreaux, a Senior Vice President and CHRO for IBM. And with that, Dean Colvin, Nickle, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks for keeping us on track here. It's a real pleasure to be joining Nickle here today. I think we're going to have a great conversation about one of the topics that is really at front and center of a lot of people's minds today. We're seeing the AI revolution in a lot of areas, and it's something people are wrestling with in lots of companies at work, in their own jobs, and organizations are really struggling to think about how best to deal with this. I'm really interested in talking to you about how IBM has been handling this, Nickle, because one of the things that really jumped out to me is, we think about IBM as a leading technology company, but at IBM HR has really been at the forefront of embedding AI and automation into its tools and processes, which might surprise people when they think about, HR is really about people, but it's also a place where at IBM, HR has really been client zero for some of your AI products, and you lead the company in innovative new offerings, experiences for the IBMers. So I'd love to hear more about that, how this came to the forefront at IBM HR.
Sure. And Dean Colvin, thank you for having me today. So yeah, it probably sounds a little unusual to some that in the AI revolution, that HR has become the testing ground. And it's really because this technology advancement is happening at the same time some other forces are affecting all organizations, companies. It doesn't matter if you're big or small, workplaces in general. Three forces are also hitting organizations. One is that there is an increased focus on what we'll call efficiency, optimal cost. If you're going to spend $1, you want to spend it in the place that's getting the right return. So that is hitting all organizations. The second thing that's hitting is also an increased complexity in compliance, regulatory environment. States, cities, countries, jurisdictions around the world are all embracing different workplace issues, but they're also setting different standards. So this is hitting HR departments, organizations to then comply with different sets of standards, increasing complexity, which if you notice, flies in the face of what we're talking about of optimal cost. And then there's a third thing that won't surprise anybody, and that is employees, all of us, are expecting consumer grade experiences in the workplace. Just like what you experience outside of the workplace, you're expecting those same simple, mobile, user-friendly tasks to happen inside the workplace. Again, a lot of pressure then when you're dealing with complex environments. So these three things are happening at the same time. The AI technology is being really ratcheted up. And so what we're finding is actually this was the perfect marriage. There was no way we were going to solve those three forces by running the same processes we've always run, or just putting more people into the equation. The way we were going to solve those three forces was actually by adopting the technology. And so, just as you said, everywhere from onboarding to compensation to payroll processing, we are finding ways to embed AI into our processes to make them better for our employees, better for the HR professionals that are executing them, but also to embrace and make things more seamless. So for us, this was a convergence of factors that all came together. And I, for one, would have struggled with the three forces if AI kind of hadn't come to the rescue.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point when you think about the manager today dealing with that complexity. How do you're the same manager that you were, but you're dealing with this extra complexity of the challenges, extra burdens being placed on you. I mean, you sort of think of, almost like a pilot, right? Flying a plane today needs all that technology. They're still the brilliant pilot, but the technology helps them do the work. It sounds like that's sort of what the AI is doing for the manager here.
Absolutely. We think it's kind of unlocking, it's assisting, it's enabling, it's allowing them to deal with that complexity in new ways. So exactly as you said, it is kind of unlocking and amplifying them.
Yeah. Now, you've got the AI up and running, but I'm sure there must have been challenges in bringing it all together, right? I mean, I think, we sometimes think about, oh, you turn on the technology and it works, but many of us had a lot of experiences with technologies where you open the box or install the software, and then it's quite a while before everything's working the way you want. Can you talk about some of the challenges about trying to launch this revolution, how you're using AI?
Absolutely. So we actually started our AI automation journey in 2017. So we were an early adopter, and we did it with a chatbot, a digital assistant, what we call Ask HR internally. And that digital assistant was supposed to help the workforce by surfacing up answers to HR questions in a real-time way. The chatbot is always on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It can ingest all that complexity that we were just talking about and surface up the answer to the question. So that's where we first piloted this. But as you stated, there were several changes. The first, which I think will not surprise anyone, is the technology itself was still in early stages. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you could tell you were talking to a chatbot. And so that creates a lower employee experience. The second is purely behavior change. And that is all of us as individuals. If you're used to asking a person a question, how comfortable are you now loading the chatbot, asking the question? So that was another challenge that we had. And a third challenge that we had were the HR professionals themselves. Thinking about this is this a replacement of me? Mm-hmm. Is this an augmentation of the work that I do? And so getting them through that change management. If we fast forward to where we are today, so about 5 years later, this chatbot now serves 9 million interactions a year. 9 million. So clearly we broke through the barrier of adoption. But more than that, it is saving managers and employees time. The NPS, the Net Promoter Score for the chatbot, is now over 35. And we're also finding that for HR professionals, what has happened is this has totally changed their day-to-day job, where they were maybe spending a significant time before doing manual, routine work. That is now being handled by the AI and automation. And the average HR band for our generalist population has increased by almost 2. So they are clearly doing higher value work and kind of more fulfilling careers from that perspective. But again, it's certainly some challenges to get over in the beginning.
Yeah, you mentioned that trust in technology aspect, that kind of reliance. and you think about, technologies we use every day that, a calculator, I trust the calculator will give me the right answer. But, if I have some medical issue, there's all the equipment, but I like to have the doctor there who I rely on to give that research. How did you deal with that question of getting the employees and the managers to trust and use the technology?
So there were a couple principles and what I'll call guardrails we set at the very beginning. And I think this is very important for any organization. So we did adopt the transparency and trust policies that are out there around AI that the US has adopted, the EU has adopted. We've also put some of our own guardrails in place around this. So the first thing we said was AI is never a decision maker. So that AI can surface up data, it can surface up recommendations, but decisions are uniquely made by humans. The second thing we said was that AI is always transparent and explainable. And so this is really important. So if the AI is giving you an answer to maybe a vacation question or a medical benefits question, is it citing the source? Do you know where it's coming from? Do you know what data it's factoring in about you? Maybe what city or state you sit in? And that explainability is really important to building trust. And then the third thing we always said is that as you use AI, that the data, the insights from the AI are owned by the creator. And so this is also really important. We're not ingesting data from other sources and then learning off of that. We are really holding to data privacy laws around the AI. And so that has also significantly helped. Again, for anybody getting started on this, I think it's important for you to look at these trust and transparency principles, not only for just credibility in your own organization, but some of the jurisdictions you operate in are also going to require this for compliance. But the second thing is to also then think about, even aside from what regulatory might be required, what makes sense for your organization? Where are you going to uniquely use AI? And in what cases aren't you going to use AI? So for basic benefits questions, we use AI. When you actually need subject matter expertise about a sensitive medical situation, that is immediately routed to a human. And that's, again, something very specific to AI, to IBM. But I think it's important for organizations to think about in their organization, where should the AI be working? And then where should we have humans really be the intervening force?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point to think about with some of the examples that we've heard about issues with AI, and hiring decision making, where sort of biases are being introduced, and you end up sort of replicating, an existing workforce that was hired 20, 30 years ago because you're just copying what you've done in the past, which seems very different than it's the technology situation with the benefits question. Say in the middle of the night, I wish somebody would tell me what the dental, reimbursement is, right? Very different kinds of HR decisions.
Absolutely.
So when you're thinking about this kind of question of bringing AI in, if you're thinking of somebody else, maybe my organization's going to bring it in, just beginning their AI journeys, what factors do you think they should be thinking about? I can imagine things like, the cost question. Is it going to be worth it, right? There might be upfront investments we have to make. Is this really going to be worth it? Or are we going to spend a bunch of money and then we're going to spend a whole bunch of time dealing with the AI, making it work? What would you tell somebody who's thinking about that kind of decision at the start as an organization?
Yeah, and I think this is really important. Right now, AI is still in the phase of what I will call bite-size experimentation. So how it's going to unlock value in your organization or transform processes isn't going to be a big bang 3-year technology implementation. The time to value is much shorter. It's much smaller. I call it kind of Lego blocks that you're going to be building in different parts of your organization and experimenting with. So the first piece of advice that I have for any organization is just get started. just to get started. And think about this as you can start small and build on. So as an example, if I could go back in time, back to 2017, the chatbot story I told you, it's a huge success 5 years later. But in the beginning, it was a little rough. And in my opinion, it was because we oversold the AI. We told our workforce, this chatbot is going to answer all of your HR questions. It's going to do it all. And the reality is, if I could go back in time, I would have scoped it much smaller. I would have thought about what are the most often questions that are coming in to our call centers or HR teams. And I would have said, all this is going to answer for you are benefits questions, or maybe only time off questions. I would have started small and experimented. So just get started. The second thing is scope something small so that you can take your employees on the journey. You can test things with them, try it out, get feedback real time. I think that's also really important. And then once it starts working, you can add the next Lego block on. The third thing I would say is don't miss the point that we just talked about, which is set some guardrails for yourself on how the experiments are going to work. Are you going to experiment with AI being a decision maker? Are you going to experiment in certain areas, or are you going to take a human first approach in those areas? So set those principles, set those guardrails with AI. So that's the advice that I would give as people are starting on this journey. But it is going to be fascinating how I think this is really going to change all of our work.
Yeah, and I think something that people sometimes overestimate is how much work it takes to get where we may end up, right? We often have these kind of images of technology. We're going to have the flying cars, the Jetsons, even the self-driving cars. I remember 3, 4, 5 years ago, people were like, oh, they're going to be here tomorrow, and then they weren't here tomorrow. So like, well, they're not happening. But now you start to see they are, in San Francisco, you've got actual, cars driving people around with experiments. So it sounds like that's kind of the process you're seeing at IBM. It's sort of, starting, specific area, but now it sounds like you're using this across a pretty broad range of areas now.
We are, and I think you're on exactly the right point. Over the medium to long term, this is going to be totally transformational. But don't underestimate the impact it can have in the short term and what might seem like something very small. So as an example, a couple other places where we put in AI and automation. One is we do have automated employment verification letters. Now, in the past, we would have had a small team doing nothing but generating these. You might need them if you're applying for financial aid to go to Cornell, or maybe getting a mortgage on a house. And we'd have a small team dedicated to doing nothing but this. Or some of you might be in organizations where you outsource it to a vendor. So an employee raises a request and 48 hours later, the employment verification letter goes through. We now have automated this where you can get your employment verification letter in 90 seconds. So again, think about not just the time savings of that, but think about the employee experience. So when my high school senior tells me last minute he needs some employment verification information for financial aid, rather than me worrying about how I'm going to get it in the timeline, I can immediately go in and get it done. And so that is a very small use case for AI, but it's having a massive impact on the organization, the processes in the organization, but also the employee experience. We've done similar things as you think about transfers. Employee might transfer from one manager to another. It's now automated through the chatbot versus logging into systems. It's taking 75% less time. So again, these may seem like very small tactical things, but when you save people even 15 minutes a day, or 15 minutes a month over 40 processes, you start to really now unlock value for your workforce on things that drive, whether it's revenue or better employee client experiences, which make a difference.
So you already touched on this a little bit, but I'm thinking about what this then means for the work of the HR professional today and going forward. If you think about the HR team that you lead at IBM, I'm sure there's sort of some trepidation. What is it going to mean for our HR jobs? How are you thinking about it? Where do you see this going?
And I know, Dean Colvin, you and I have had lots of discussion about this, because this is one of these topics that I'm probably most passionate about making sure we're all having the right conversation about. And one of the things that frustrates me as we think about AI in the future of work is that I think too much time is being spent on the doomsday scenario of AI replacing humans, and we're going to need less people. And I think we need to reframe the conversation. Are there jobs that are going to go away because of AI? The answer is probably yes. But I think it's a small fraction of jobs in the workforce. And just like other technologies, whether it's been, the internet, there are jobs that go away, but they go away over a much longer arc. But new jobs also get created. And the rate of that change, the new jobs certainly outpace the jobs that are going away. But again, I think both of these, new jobs and jobs going away, are on the fringes. Think of it as single percentage points. Mm-hmm. I think the bigger conversation that maybe we aren't having enough of, and I hope everybody on this webcast is thinking about, is AI is going to change every job. It's going to change my job, going to change your job, Dean Colvin. And we need to get ready for how those jobs are going to change. And we need to prepare workforce for that. I also think about, I often make the comment that if I could go back in time, I would change the term artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. And I think it's at the crux of this fact that most of our jobs tasks are going to exist, but it's how do we use AI to help accelerate it? And that is what I think is really, really critical right now, that we prepare the workforce on thinking about what skills are going to be needed to work with AI, what tasks are going to remain the same, and which ones that underpin some jobs are going to fundamentally change. And those are the work design questions that I think in the short term, weeks, months, over the next year, we've got to have serious conversations about to prepare the workforce for.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point to think about, the reality that we've had technological changes going on for many, many years, right? And when I'm teaching, I sometimes teach about the classic movie On the Waterfront, about sort of labor on the New York docks back in the day, when there was lots and lots of longshoremen unloading ships. Nowadays, you go, if you're landing at Newark Airport, you can see, the cranes right there, and there's still longshoremen running those cranes. They get paid a lot more. There's a lot fewer of them. They're much more efficient doing it. They've really augmented technologically how they're doing the work. So the work is still there. It's just changed a lot by technology. And I think that's a really important point you're making, right? That we have to think about how we're going to be doing the work when we have the technology, when we're working with it. Even something like your example with the letters that you want to get the employment. Like, there are situations where you want that letter automatically, but then you hear about examples of kind of misuse. It was the one involving some termination letters that were automatically generated, and really not the kind of letter that I think any ethical organization would want to be giving to an employee in a very difficult situation where you want that kind of interactive, kind of personal touch in the conversation. And it's sort of learning how to use the technology in a way that, enhances the work and produces the response that you're hoping to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is important, right? The technology exists, but how are you applying judgment on where the technology should be applied? And I think that is critical for all of us to be thinking about.
Yeah, and recognizing which bits you might want to automate and which bits you should not be automating. You should maintain as part of that human work product, and the human touch being necessary for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dean Colvin, obviously corporate American companies are ripe for this experimentation, but one of the things we often lean on from academic institutions is the research of your faculty to think about these issues and kind of push us in maybe new or different ways. But so in the areas of data science and AI, what are some of the projects that your professors are currently working on?
Yeah, this is certainly pushing us as faculty, as professors, in kind of new research directions. Change like this is always something that's very stimulating for us to think about. How do we respond to? But it's also challenging, and it ranges really across a broad set of areas. So you think about really basic fundamental science, right? So one of the challenges in data science right now is sort of the explosion of data. We have vastly more data than we've ever had before, and it's being generated at a much higher rate. So most of the data that we have has been generated quite recently. But then there's a question of, well, what do you do with these enormous amounts of data? And this particularly comes up in things like geospatial data. We track the locations. We all carry these cell phones around that track our locations at all times. And so we have that information, but that's enormously complex data because it's got precise locations at different points in time. So you're dealing with millions and millions of observations, but also millions of variables that you're trying to analyze. And that creates difficulties in doing statistical analysis. So one of our faculty members, David Madison, is one of the leaders in research trying to develop statistical techniques to analyze that kind of data, so that you don't get the situation where you get a huge dump of data, but you don't know how to analyze it, or if you try to use standard methods, you're going to get problematic results there. And so the statistics are changing, how we're doing that, and how you apply those is changing as well. Another of our data science statistics professors, Professor Marty Wells, is doing this really interesting research around text mining, sort of analysis of words and text. He's doing interesting stuff around jury selection, trying to analyze that, because they ask lots and lots of questions, you get lots and lots of answers, so there's enormous amounts of words. Well, how do you analyze words effectively? So, it's really pushing the statistics along the way. But another area that we're really interested in, I think, as faculty, particularly at the ILR school, is we're very interested in that kind of applied question of how these technologies affect work and the work processes. A great example of that, one of our newer faculty members, Professor Alex Cantros, he's looking at warehouses and use of technology there. And so there's been increasing use of AI in warehouses. You think about, vast warehouses, which now we see all across the country, fulfillment centers. When we order something, it's delivered to our home. It gets there via the warehouse shipping. How do you get all those objects from within the warehouse and move them around and organize them? In one sense, it seems like, well, should be sort of simple to automate that, but there's a lot of different, imagine all the different packages you see. How do you pick them up? There's a lot of AI that's now going into automating that will change a lot of those jobs. And to your earlier point, that's going to have implications for certainly some jobs probably being replaced by technology, but potentially, if it's done right, upgrading the quality of the jobs that remain, because there's lots of jobs that aren't great jobs today. And it would be great if we could have technology improve some of those jobs while sort of allowing us as human beings to do better jobs, more using our intelligence, using our capabilities as people. So enormous amounts of change, right, that's going on. So it's really inspiring a lot of research.
And I think it's fantastic. And I do think you also brought us to a really key point here. A lot of people just talk about AI, like it starts with AI. This data science piece underneath you have no AI if you don't have the data or data science. So it kind of starts there. So the research going on there is fascinating. Then the AI, then the application to work. I think it's a really important to know that the faculty and professors are kind of across that spectrum because all of it is necessary. So you talked a little bit about professors and faculty. Talk to me a little bit about how you're preparing the students, particularly in this data science area. How are you getting them ready for a whole new world of work?
It really is a new world, and it's really now filtering down to our students and what they're learning. You were a student at ILR. Back about the same year I was a grad student at ILR. And back then, we certainly had plenty of students who were like, well, I like the reading, I like thinking about, people should, but, all that data stuff, you had to do statistics, but there was lots of students who were like, okay, that I just have to do it because it's a requirement, I want to stay away from it. That's really changed. So over the last, particularly the last 10, 15 years, we've really seen our students start to demand to learn more about what's going on in this world, the data science, the applications, and they're seeing that that's going to be part of their future careers, using these tools. And so they want to learn it while they're here. So we actually did a major update of the undergraduate curriculum the last couple of years. And one of the changes was in this area. We had a real good traditional statistics course that really grounded the students well in those kind of fundamental basics to understand the mathematics and foundations of statistics. But we weren't doing a lot in terms of making sure they're learning about the data science applications. How do you take that base knowledge and actually use it? And so we've added in a new second kind of course sequence where they have some different options they can take, where they learn more about those data science applications, some involving programming, if we develop the skills there to be able to kind of use that knowledge in a more effective applied sense. So that's been really something we've been upgrading, and we've just added a new data science minor at Cornell that the students can take, and something that's actually very popular, real student demand for that now, which is interesting. The other side has been that kind of question of understanding how the technology is affecting work. And so we're definitely seeing the demand for the courses there. We've got this course in HR analytics, thinking about in the HR field, really data-driven approaches to working in HR and really upgrading the student skill there. And then we've got a really interesting, innovative course on technology at work. One of our professors, Adam Seth Litwin, teaches that really delves into some of these questions we've been talking about how you actually are seeing technology transforming jobs, and sort of learning about it in an interactive way, using the technology itself to as part of the course, so integrating actually into the course itself. So I think that's been a really interesting innovation pedagogically.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And look, I think what I'm hearing between the faculty research, everything that we're doing in the curriculum with students, but even the work they're getting involved in, again, I think you can see how broad this area and impactful this is. But I do want to maybe leave, and before we open it up for questions, I know we're also very aligned. A lot of interesting data, a lot of interesting technology, a lot of interesting work implications to study. But we're also very focused, and you guys are very focused on the ethics, the social impact of this revolution, if you think about it that way. So can you talk about some of the things the faculty and you're thinking about in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's really challenging ethical issues here that you need to work through. We actually have a new course, Liz Carnes, one of our faculty, developed on ethics in data science, and working through problems. One example she works through with her class is facial recognition, which is a more and more widespread technology that has very useful applications. You don't have to remember your passcode on your iPhone any longer for a lot of stuff. You just hold it up, facial recognition. But facial recognition can be using in a lot of sense, a lot of different settings. But there have been examples, and she's built this case study off of one of these examples where a facial recognition system wasn't working on an individual, and it had been trained off certain facial appearances and was not picking up somebody who had a different racial ethnic background. And working through that thing, the organization then, obviously had to deal with this very difficult situation, something that I think an ethical organization would never want to be in that situation, would want to respond to. Well, how do you respond to that effectively? How does, the impact on that individual being really difficult and inappropriate for that individual? And so really that kind of question of, understanding the technology, taking ownership of it, and working through those ethical issues. Something that really ranges across different countries. We talked earlier about different data requirements that different countries have, and you have to think about those kind of regulatory issues. A couple of our faculty are working on issues around AI and employee voice, particularly in the European context, where there are a lot of different regulations that are different from the US. But if you're an organization operating on a worldwide basis, you have to deal with those. So they've been kind of looking at how that varies country by country.
Fantastic.
So let's maybe take a peek at what we've got for some questions. I've been seeing there's some audience questions already jumping up. So great to see that. So one of the questions relates to something related to what we've been touching on. Question from Jennifer: is one of the ways HR managers using AI is using programs that sort through applicants and eliminate applicants? So AI in selection. How do you think about that?
So IBM does not use AI in selection. So this is, again, one of the choices we have made at this time. And it's important for us. But again, every company will make different choices. I will tell you, my talent acquisition team wishes I would reverse this decision. We get about 5 million applications a year. So using some type of automated sourcing and prioritization would certainly help the workflow. But just as you talked about, as we think about the robustness of the algorithms, we're at a point yet where we'd still like to test those before we put them into production. Now, I think there are tremendous other opportunities for AI and automation. Like I talked about, onboarding. You've already accepted an offer. Is there customized information that is coming on to me? Can I ask a chatbot questions? Can my benefits be processed in a faster, automated way? All great. For us, just selection isn't there yet.
Mm-hmm. A related kind of question, sort of in terms of these areas that AI has different kinds of uses. Somebody was asking whether there's examples or suggestions for using AI for compensation. And that kind of jumps out to me as one of those areas where there's actually a lot of value from an analytics perspective. We sort of look at things like, do you have gender bias in your compensation? And certainly the analytics can really help you pick out things. But at the same point, right, there are those questions of how far do you want to use it, and making sure that there's kind of the human oversight. How do you think about the compensation area, Ade?
Yeah, so this is also an area we've tested around a lot with. We do use AI in compensation, but exactly to your point, how far do we go? We stop short that more than where the technology is right now. So as an example, annual salary increases, managers get a budget, they get to allocate it. Mm-hmm. We have AI that gives them recommendations on how best to allocate that budget for many of the things you've talked about, taking in different data sources, how fairly are they compensated? What are their skills? What is their performance? What is their experience? And the AI makes recommendations of, given the money you have in your bucket, how should you optimally spend it? But that's where the AI stops. It is a recommendation. Managers then have the ability to say, there's something I know about Nickle's performance that may not be in the AI algorithm, or there's something I know about her skills and level of contribution. And so managers can make adjustments. And I think that again, they are the decision makers. Now, in the back end, we use a lot of data science to then say, okay, we had the recommendations, we had managers making different decisions. What can we learn from that to make it better? But also, let's make sure that the decisions that were actually made are fair and unbiased. So you can do the check at the end, but that's a perfect example where I think AI can assist, but humans decide.
A related question about how we're using it as a tool comes in the question of how do we see AI in terms of conducting research, writing news releases, and internal messaging, right? I mean, that's certainly something I think people think a lot about, that sort of generate a letter or an email, but how far do you go with it, right? I mean, professors, we write a lot of recommendation letters for students, right? So do we have the Chat GPT recommendation letter, right? It's a temptation, I think, there, but there's a certain point at which there's a type of messaging that you're responsible to yourself or oversight. How do you think about that in the work?
I think about it probably exactly as you just articulated. There's kind of some standardization. We talked about the employment verification letters, right? I think there's a lot of value but where you need a kind of a unique point of view, where you want to be the creator of the point of view, I think it's really important then to leave that to the human, right? And so that's the distinction. But as you think about in organizations, everything from where you're generating content, you're gonna have to make some decisions about where you draw the line. So where do you say AI isn't involved at all? Where do you say it's okay for AI to do a first pass and then I come on top of it? This is a discussion that's being had with software developers and coding. AI generating code. Where should it be purely created by humans? Where could it be auto-generated? Where is it somewhere in the middle where there's a first pass of the basics, the foundation, and then a human coming over top? This is going to be totally, really where you draw that line might be dependent on the organization and the business value you have, but also on some of these social ethical questions we have.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because ultimately you are responsible for the messages that go out. So your imprimatur is on it, and you're responsible if it has the negative consequences. So you have to think through that question of, well, okay, is this something that I'm comfortable with, the automated aspect of the response? If not, then I need to have the eye upon it to say, okay, I've thought about it, I've maybe edited it, and now I'm comfortable with it going out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So more of kind of one of these kind of data security ethical kind of questions. So a question from Frank: how does IBM keep its AI secure and make sure it's only populated by authorized IBM employees? This is an interesting question. It's something we've been thinking about as a university with AI systems. The concern about you upload, people upload confidential information. We have a lot of regulatory requirements about student information. You cannot just put stuff into the AI systems, and some of the more public ones, I think people sometimes forget that it's going out into the world there. So how do you think about that at IBM and keeping that security?
Really important. So we have put out policies for our employees about which AI tools they're allowed to use and which ones they aren't. And just as you said, there are some very popular AI tools out there that when you upload data, it's in the public domain. And the algorithms are learning off of that, taking that. And so it does go back to one of our principles, which is we believe that the creator of the data is the owner. So even when we're helping clients implement this technology, we're not then using it to update our algorithms. That is owned by the client. Similarly, internally, we are using that. It is secure. We are very careful about what data we ingest and what data we don't. There is some data. Would we love to use it in algorithms? Maybe. But if it wasn't collected for the purposes of that, we don't use it. Or if we don't have employee consent where it's required. So this idea of being responsible users, we can get very enamored with, oh, but the AI would be better. Let's use it here. Let's use it there. You do have this underlying, and that's where I think we talked about, you've got to start with the security of the technology. You've got to understand the governance and the rules around the AI and how it's operating. But you also have to make sure that it is always transparent so you can watch what's happening. And I think those are three pieces to kind of keep in mind here.
Yeah, that point about the transparency, you can see what's happening, I think is a really important point. There's been some proposals of kind of regulations that would sort of require to be able to unpack decisions. I know, IBM isn't doing this, but, companies that were considering using AI in a selection decision, if you have a lawsuit over your selection decisions, you have to be able to answer it and pull apart to say, okay, how was that decision made? If there's an allegation of bias and compensation or selection, you have to be able to come up with an answer. If you don't have the transparency, you're going to be in trouble, I think.
Absolutely. And, the technology we're putting in place around AI and then we're using in the HR department does have three components to it. So the first one, we call our platform Watson X, but the first part is this point around data. Mm-hmm. What data are you ingesting, and is the data itself secure? The second part, we call it Watson.ai. It is the AI algorithms. What algorithms are you using? Why are you using them? Are they robust enough? Are they scalable enough? Or are they built off of very small sample sizes? But then there is this third piece that I think is going to become more and more critical. So the third piece of our Watson X platform is .governance. And it is exactly this piece. And as we think about skills HR professionals are going to need going forward, you may not be somebody who's actually looking at the security of the infrastructure of the data. You may not be writing the AI algorithms. But as you put AI in your processes, you may be playing a very critical point in governance, not only writing the rules, but what that governance technology does is it's showing you the AI real time. It's letting you know when there's drift, when there are hallucinations. It's letting you know that. So as a process owner, you can stop. Or when it's starting to drift too much or drift unexpectedly. And I think, again, that skill set of being able to watch that governance is something that's going to be really important for HR professionals.
Yeah, I think that really hits at that intersection of the kind of decision-making we want to make about what decisions we retain for the human, the person taking responsibility for it, and then that technical kind of competence of being able to kind of interact your sort of human decision making with what the technology is giving you, right? Where is it coming from? How far is it going? Is it going beyond what you sort of intended in terms of its role, right? And if you're relying on it, that's going to create that tension, I think, naturally.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a question in the chat that's, I think, probably more intended for me in my area, sort of building off that about somebody says, you mentioned AI will not be a decision-making tool, but how can we implement AI in the mediation field? So I study, mediators and arbitrators, and I think for them, and many of them are sole practitioners, that's kind of the nature of that profession. I think AI has a lot of potential for helping them. You think about, a lot of people, consultants, others sort of individual kind of businesses. AI as a tool could be very useful for sort of routine parts of the job of the business, running it. But I think, the guardrails that we've been talking about are particularly important there. If you're hiring a media arbitrator or, probably consultants, you're relying on their sort of expertise and judgment. And if it's turned into something that's just a kind of AI answer, they're not getting the thing that they're looking for, right? So I think my sense is in a lot of those professions, and the ones I said, it will be useful. It's important for people to learn them and think about those areas where you can use them, but to be careful, right? I mean, going back to your experience, right? Starting with concrete things, not having the AI do everything.
I think that's right. And, as you think about some of those professions, mediation, even sometimes people talk about HR partners, there is an element of their job that may be data collection. They may spend a lot of time pulling from different sources, data collection. There is an opportunity for AI to really synthesize that for them, right? Or pull from different sources and offer it up in a usable way. Then they're not spending time logging into systems, pulling from this source, doing a spreadsheet. The AI is doing that for them. And then they're applying their expertise in a very unique way. We found this with HR partners during a promotion process. Again, that is a process that's really important. What was happening, though, is HR generalists were spending a lot of time collecting data, learning plans. What was your performance rating? How much money do you make? What skills? They were chasing all that data in systems. They weren't actually sitting down advising a leader. Let's talk about who should you get promoted. How should you tell Nickle she's not getting promoted? Let's role play that conversation. So that stuff that has a ton of value, they weren't spending time on because they were they were running around for manual things. I think in some of the mediation fields and these other, very high-end fields where your judgment is what people really want, your expertise is what people really want, this does unlock you to spend more time doing that.
Yeah. You imagine you're spending your time putting together expense reports, something like that. The AI could do that for you, and you're doing your high-end work people are paying you for. That's value for that's going to be more value added. It's an interesting question from Brian. If you are in a job or category of work that is not yet using AI, but you can see how it could add you value or create efficiencies, how do you recommend people go about initiating AI integration to a new task? Right. So I could imagine, of course, IBM's a vast organization. You have employees out there, who might be like, oh, I don't use AI, but I can use it for that. How do you capture that from employees, and how do the employees, make the case for using it?
Yeah. So I would love to tell you that all these examples I just gave you of how we're using AI, where I sat at my desk and I came up with all of them and they just happened. I will be honest with you, none of them happened that way. They came exactly from how Ryan is speaking about it. Mm-hmm. Somebody has an idea. Let's try it out. So a couple things I would say about. There are some tools out there that you can start to play with, start to gain skills around some of the AI, test it out. Think about, could we use it this way? It's okay. And there are lots, I know Cornell offers this throughout the university. There are things you can start learning about AI, automation, data science. Use that. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would say is start thinking about what I will call the business case, the return. If AI could do X, it would save me 10 minutes. It would save me $100. Think about what the business case would be. And then my perspective is, run it up through your management team. You might be surprised again, because this technology is a lower investment than some of the big technology platforms we typically have in HR. You might be surprised how quickly you could get started. But don't forget the business case piece, right? We don't implement AI just for the sake of implementing AI. We do want that return either around cost or time or experience.
That's a great point, I think, when you're thinking about making the case, advocating for your idea. Really great question about how this could be a challenge for the human resource business partner. And the question is, how do IBM's human resource business partners increase touch points with employees, have that kind of informal interaction, employee sensing, without building the quick rapport with employees that comes through answering the administrative HR questions that now go to the chatbot? So is there a chance that you lose some of that opportunity for building kind of the connections by answering those simple, basic questions that then prep you for the more complex? So have you encountered that, and how does a good
It's a great question, and it was actually one of our fears as we started doing this. But here's what we have found instead. So what has happened instead is those basic questions get answered. When you have a more complex or a very important personal situation, because the basic questions are being answered, HR generalists are freed up to get to you faster. And so you're actually building some more credibility more quickly because it's a complex or deeply personal where you need that versus I've answered 5 vacation questions for you over the last 3 months, right? And so that trust is building more quickly because we're getting to you on the right issues. But the second thing is the HR generalist has now time to also do maybe some more programmatic. Maybe it's something at your site or location. And so they're interacting with you on an engagement level. Or maybe it's something around a career fair and internal mobility. So we're finding that those business partners are able to spend their time on things that matter more to employees. And so it is less interaction, but it's higher impact interaction. And that's we're finding, from an employee perspective, they still are getting the pulse and they're still getting the value, maybe even at a higher level.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to think about, as your kind of people are thinking about introducing the AI is how do you get to that kind of point, getting to that point of the higher level kind of interaction. That's hopefully what we're all kind of moving towards. But, there's obviously going to be challenges along the way. We don't have commander data to assist us, the AI. It's my very nerdy Star Trek reference, but
I love it.
I do think sometimes that's what we think is around the corner, but the reality is there's a lot of steps kind of along the way. We have to think about how we effectively move along the more immediate stuff. Nickle, this has been a fantastic conversation. Really interesting, all the things you're doing at IBM in this space. And thanks for all the insights for the audience today.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. And for everybody listening, take my advice. Just get started.
Excellent. Well, good message to take away. And thanks for joining us today. And it's been a real pleasure talking to everyone.